Today, we're going to be speaking about preparedness. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about what Corazon Healdsburg is doing, please call our offices at 707-395-0985. Thank you, Lisette. I would also like to welcome our guests. We're going to start with our Sonoma County District 4 Supervisor, James Gore. Hi, James. How are you this evening? Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you. This is a great passion of mine. In these 4 years, if we include the power shutoffs, we've had more than 7 or 8 disasters in the last 4 years. So all of our community is traumatized by all of this and the uncertainty of everything that comes with a disaster. These disasters not only affect people who are in the immediate line of fire, who have houses that catch on fire, but it also affects salaries, incomes, being able to pay rent when there's evacuations. What can I do with my family? I have more expenses and less income, especially for all those who are struggling day to day to pay the bills and pay the rent, and who also are the essential workers for our community. So I think it's really important that we're not waiting at the last minute to listen to this, but that we are planning ahead to get ready. And the first stage is to know what we need to do to prepare. A big goal of mine is that we change from a system of translation of information we create in English by us gringos to a system where we create information, or the information is created by people from the community who have the knowledge and the culture and the language, and who are, and so that this information is created from community roots. I am here to speak, but mostly I'm here to listen and to take note of all the details and to push this effort forward in our system to improve how we do this type of work. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us, Supervisor Gore. We also have Mr. Ruben Mandujano, who's the fire inspector from the City of Healdsburg Fire Department. Hello, Ruben. How are you? Thank you for the invitation, Angie. My name is Ruben Mandujano. I work in the City of Healdsburg Fire Department. The information that I'm going to share with you today, I think, of course, I'm going to be focusing on the Healdsburg Fire Department because that's who I represent. But even so, the information that I'm going to share is appropriate for the whole county. Thank you. This evening, we also have Alma Bowen, the Executive Director of the organization Nuestra Comunidad. Good afternoon, Angie, and all of you. I'm very happy to be here this evening to share the experiences that we have had, and also to share with you everything that we are doing to inform and prepare our community before, during, and after disaster. Thank you. Thank you, Alma. And we also have, last but not least, Neil Pacheco, Director of Community Engagement of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Sonoma County. Hello, good evening. How are you? Thank you so much for the invitation from Corazon Healdsburg and for the collaboration of James Gore, the fire department, and Corazon Healdsburg to share experiences about our personal experiences last year. And I'd also like to comment, make some comments from business owners and how they really were impacted by these fires. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you. As I was saying, this evening we're going to speak about preparation for natural disasters and emergencies. And many people ask themselves, what is a natural disaster? We know it's a huge event which causes serious problems, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and in our case, fires. We know that in the Kincaid fire that started the 23rd of October of 2019, it was a wildfire that burned more than 75,000 acres and required the mandatory evacuation of more than 90,000 people. So that's why we're here. This is something that has actually happened in our community, not just once, but it also happened in 2017 in Sonoma County. So we are here to discuss how are we going to prepare ourselves? What do we need to do as a community, as a family, as individuals? What did we learn from the past fires, and how are we going to prepare ourselves for any future fires? So my first question is, what did we learn from the 2019, from the Kincaid fire? What were your experiences? What would you like to share about that fire? I would like to comment. I'm Neil Pacheco again, Director of Community Engagement of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Sonoma County. I have been around for the last two fires, and what I could say in terms of how to prepare ourselves, what we learned from those experiences, I personally decided last year to stay in one of the shelters, and I lived through the experience as a citizen, as a worker, those who don't have anywhere else to stay, families who don't have a shelter. So I decided to take my family with me to live through that experience and to learn firsthand what are the needs of families and people in these shelters. I came to the shelter that's on the fairgrounds in Santa Rosa. One of the things I noticed is that in the shelters, they are not ready for you. You evacuate, they give you a mandatory evacuation order. You grab the basic things that you have time to get. You get to these shelters, and there's only a few people, and I noticed there's no coordination for the beds, there's no volunteers. That's one of the things I noticed. Security at night when families are you need security. We're arriving with our children. There's needs to be more security and coordination. I think you need managers or people in charge. There were only two people in charge, and one had to be there for 12 to 14 hours, and they're in charge of the kitchens, the donations, the food, the water, the resources that are coming, the guests, the nonprofits. So there's a need for a lot of coordination in order to take care of these families who are arriving. I stayed the first afternoon and evening, and we had to work. All of us who were there had to work in order to settle ourselves and take care of what was happening in that shelter. Fortunately, the people from the field who evacuated from Healdsburg, from these areas of Geyserville, the ones who have work visas that come from Mexico with work visas, they took lead of coordinating themselves so that we'd have all the beds that the families needed. Another thing that I think that happened there is that next day, when lunchtime came, there's families, there's children. There was not an adequate coordination in terms of the food and where it needed to be brought to. People were waiting for food. So I'm a person who likes to take action. We contacted social media, local communication media such as radio. So we started asking people to bring supplies for families who needed them. Then I realized that it wasn't just where we were that we had these problems, but other shelters were also suffering the same needs. They also needed food, they needed resources, they needed attention. I believe that Red Cross has done great work, but they are people who aren't from our community. They can't identify with the pain that we as families are going through at that moment. There are people who said, you can only eat one meal. And someone said, they're hungry, give them food. If they're hungry, please give them food. We need more food. So these things, living through that experience, so having been there and having lived it firsthand, helped me understand the need that every person has, the emotional needs. There are families who get there and are told that there's no room for a bed and they have children. You have to sleep in your car. So people have had to sleep in the parking lots with their children in the cars. And the emotional state I realized when I saw these children and these families going through such a hard time. Everyone was very worried about what was coming and traumatized and not knowing what was happening. Everyone is scared. So there are nonprofits who are there to provide services, to provide emotional support services. That would be very helpful. We looked for help with the clowns to give a little bit of distraction and relief to the children. So that's part of the needs that I witnessed. Also, how the Latino businesses were affected in this area. I can tell you many businesses in Healdsburg and Windsor, stores, supermarkets, lost hundreds and thousands of dollars of food. So they sent the food to the taco trucks to be able to feed the people. Today, the situation would be much more complicated with what's going on with the pandemic. And I think we should be much more prepared in many ways with coordination with the volunteers that are going to work in the shelters, the FEMA people, the Red Cross staff, so that they would have that empathy with people, something which I left on the second day in the afternoon because I didn't find that empathy. And I saw that made a huge difference. That's not right. So there's a lack of coordination in the mornings and in the afternoons. I had to leave to some other place where I could take my family, which was more peaceful. But I wanted to go through the experience as a citizen, as a resident, to be present and to see what happens at night when there's no security, that there's a lack of food during the day, that there's not enough beds, there's not enough volunteers. And that people's emotional state is such that people need there to support that. There should be people from our community going to these communities so they can be a point of reference to help communicate what we're going through. Thank you so much for sharing, Neil. I think your experience is very valid. You lived it firsthand and you saw all this need with your own eyes. And we thank you so much for all the work that you did during the Kincaid fire. I would also like to hear from some other people. What were your experiences? What did you notice when people had to evacuate? We know that many people were not prepared. They didn't have their documents ready. They didn't have their go bag ready in case there was an emergency. So I would like to hear a little bit more from Lisbeth or Jeanette or anyone who would like to share. What did you notice in terms of people not being prepared to evacuate? I would like to share with you the experience of seeing people running north, heading north. In Cloverdale, There was not a shelter. I think it was just a center where a charging center. That's all you could do. There was no food. They had nothing. They were totally unprepared. They didn't have clothes. They didn't have food. They didn't have blankets. They were there for a day and a half or 2 days without access to food, to a shelter that was appropriate for families. And this really concerned me. It still worries me that we are not talking yet about plans to open shelters in this area. Another thing that I do recognize is communication. In comparison with the past fires in Santa Rosa, as James Corr said, translation was very effective. The community had access to information. But I had the opportunity to go to San Francisco to a shelter, and I knew that there were people in Petaluma who were sleeping there because there were no space. And there was quite a few spaces in San Francisco. So I think we need, as Neil said, more coordination with the Latino community to help people to prepare better. I think the communication is there, but as organizations and community members, we really have to share this information and mobilize these resources so everyone who needs it can have access. And Jeanette, I know you live in Alexander Valley, and you went through a super worrisome experience. Maybe you'd like to share that. Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Valencia, and as Lisbeth says, thank God, I know her, and because of her, I knew there were things that we could do, help that we could access for those of us who were in the situation of having to evacuate rapidly. But as she said, there were many people who didn't even know. We were spreading the word between us so that we would have that information. And we also had the experience of the first fire, which was 2 years earlier, 1 or 2 years before the Kincaid fire. And we were also in the situation of having to be ready to evacuate. And as they say, sometimes the families as Latinos, we don't have a lot of experience or communication, even with our own kids, to tell them what we need to do in case of an emergency. That night, in the first fire, we had people who lost their homes that we knew. I invited them to live with us. We were also being threatened to be evacuated. And when we saw that they had to leave, and they only had 5 minutes to pack a few things, the most basic things that they could grab, it was basically leave with a shirt on their back to save and run to the car to save their lives. So this was really useful and helpful for us. So when they were telling us to prepare yourselves or take a day, if you had advance warning, to prepare yourselves, because we didn't know if we were going to be evacuated. So that time, thank God, we did not have to be evacuated. But in this second fire, they told us that we couldn't stay. So we have a little bit of experience of knowing that having our documents or even a backpack with a change of clothes so that we have something to grab and leave as quickly as possible. So in this case, it wasn't too quick because they did give us advance warning, but it is so important to have a little bit more of communication between us, amongst us, and to see what we can do as a community so that we can share the word, share the message. Thank you so much to Corazon, because you were helping us and supporting us with our needs. You were always concerned about us, to seeing if we needed anything or if we knew of other people who needed help. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeanette, for sharing. This was not the first, and it won't be the last that we have a fire in Sonoma County or in California. So we would like to hear a little bit from Mr. Ruben. Could you share a little bit about what do we know about the fire season?
¿Cómo va a ser este año?
Before I tell you what this year is going to be like, in the fireman's life, every year, we always think this year is going to be the worst. That's the mentality we use to prepare ourselves for the worst. But let's go back. Let's back up a bit. The experiences of Neil and Jeanette, I think we need to learn from those experiences. Because every time we have a fire, we learn something we could have done better. So I've been noticing what Neil said and what Jeanette said. We have to be prepared because my perspective from seeing the news, the temperatures are changing. Fires are more intense. This situation is not going to get better from one day to the next. It's going to take years to get better. There are ways to improve our environment, but that's going to take years. Just like it's taken years to get to where we are now, it's going to take years to make a change. So we need to prepare ourselves and be ready to participate in these changes. We need to support. An example is supporting James Gore because he has ideas about what we should do as a county to get rid of this type of fires. As firefighters, we know what needs to be done to improve the situation. So, but it's not to take too much time because for the people who are listening, fires are going to be worse. And with COVID-19, I'm guessing what Neil is saying, that we're not ready for this situation, it's going to be even harder. The Red Cross are coming up with new ways of how to provide safer shelters with social distancing. So if we're not able to have distancing before, it's going to be very hard to have a lot of people. And how can we help people? So the process is in process for evacuation, for planning evacuations. We learned a lot from the first fire in Sonoma. And this last one, if you notice, people did not die from the fires because we had enough time to keep people informed. With Nixle, the county has been more active in getting the word out and alerting people. So what I tell people is, don't have one plan, have two plans because possibly the first plan may not work. So you need to have a backup plan. We need to be prepared with two different plans. Or I'm going south or I'm going north. Which way is there less danger? We need to stay informed. As Jeanette said, we have to have a backpack so that if we have to evacuate quickly, we have something ready. Now, if it's a question of an earthquake, how are we preparing for that? That's a whole other topic from fires. What should we do in the case of an earthquake? So we need to be prepared with two plans. One to evacuate, two evacuation plans, one heading north, one heading south. If it's an earthquake, where am I going to stay? Do I have enough supplies in my home or outside my home because my house might come down or might burn? Do I have a stash of safe things where I can go? Do I have the space if it's not a fire? Do I have a clean space from vegetation? Is my house cleared of vegetation so it doesn't attack my house? We learned a lot from these fires. And if there's something else I can say, prepare your homes so that you can survive alone without help. So when we were told we had till 4 p.m. to evacuate, many people started preparing their homes because they were going to stay in their homes. That's necessary too. When it's time to evacuate, am I going to evacuate? Am I going to stay? So we have to make those decisions as a family. If you're going to stay, if someone's going to stay, or are the people who are going to stay in the city? We need to know who is the point person and where they're going to be. So we think so we're not worried about someone stealing from our house. So there's a lot that we can do. I recommend that you visit the Healdsburg City website and also the Sonoma County website. There's a lot of really good information. There's a lot of documents. We have documents that we can share. If you come to our fire station, we have lots of copies to share with people. Otherwise, you can go to the website, the county's website, where you will find the document called Living with Fires in Sonoma County. And they have information on how to clean up around our houses, clean up the vegetation, how to prepare our houses, really good information. In terms of evacuation, Healdsburg City also has a document on its website about disasters. CAL FIRE, the Forest Department, has other documents called Ready, Set, Go. This document is great. We have the information at our fingertips. We need to make a plan and carry out that plan. In our city, I think we were lucky because the wind changed direction before getting to Healdsburg. That's what saved us, I think. And those of us who were surrounding the city dealing with the fires. So we have information, we have a lot of information. Are there ways to improve? Yes. Neil offered his insight into the situation that we learned from the first fire in Santa Rosa. Many people had that experience. There was not one person in control because we weren't ready, we weren't prepared. Thanks to that first fire, for the second fire, the city of Healdsburg, and I think the whole county, did a lot better in preparing because we learned lessons from that first disaster. I don't have a lot more time. I'd like to give my word to other people to speak. Thank you so much for that information. For those of you who are watching us on Facebook, we are going to add the links that were mentioned for the information that was mentioned on the City of Healdsburg website. We're also going to put Nixle information for those of you who aren't already registered to get notifications on your cell phone, which can be in English or Spanish, so that you can register. And we're also going to send it so you can ask your friends, your family, your neighbors that if they haven't registered a Nixle, you can share that information with them. So we know what happened, what were some of the experiences. So now let's talk about how can we prepare ourselves? What do we need to do to be ready? As Mr. Ruben said, not just one plan, two plans, three plans, maybe four different plans. So I would like now to share, and I would like to invite Alma to talk about the Listos program and to share information about how you and your family can prepare for the next disaster. Thank you so much. As we have said, there's a lot of information on how to prepare yourselves. There's abundant information on all kinds of different websites. If you look under disaster preparation, I think there's 30,000 different sites with information. So there's not a lack of information. What we need right now is a cultural change. It's a change in how we think and approach this, because before the 2017 fires in the Sonoma complex, C-Tubs, we thought that when we had a disaster, that was something that happened somewhere else. It wasn't something that happened here in Sonoma County. And now what we are realizing, and that's not true. It's not just happening here, but it's happening frequently. It's something that we have to consider, how to learn to grow food, how do we prepare ourselves. And this has to be a part of our lives from now on. It's not something that needs to stop. So during the time when everything is fine and the sky is blue and there's no disasters, we haven't got to fire season yet, we should be using this time to prepare ourselves, to take workshops. Another thing that I would like the community to realize is that the responsibility for preparing ourselves so that you, your neighbors, is a commitment that we all need to make. Each person needs to make this commitment, because when a disaster hits us, all the departments like police, ambulances, firefighters all have their part to play. And they are counting on the public to survive, and that we can also help each other if it's needed. So having a plan is critical, because when you can survive yourself and your house is fine, you have your plan, you know how to get in touch with everyone, you have your supplies all together, you can leave quickly, you are going to be in a position where you can go check on your neighbor, for example, or an elderly neighbor who's living alone in your neighborhood. You will be able to go make sure that they're okay too and help them. So we really have to help each other as a community. Part of the plan, as has been said, is to have your kit, your go kit, a large one to keep at home in case you have to shelter in place, that would help you survive. They say that you need 72 hours or 36 hours, but most organizations are now saying that you should be prepared to survive for a week. Because as we know, during the Kincaid fires, when they shut off all the electricity, that didn't take a day or two. That took a week in some areas to get power back. So if you don't have food that doesn't require refrigeration, you don't have water, because when the electricity goes, sometimes if you're on well water, you can't access your water. So you have to think on two things. You need to be prepared to leave and what you need, and you need to be prepared to stay and what you need. How do we communicate with each other, and what do we do if we need to help someone else? So it's a cultural change that is required. And I love this program, Listos, because what it does is it shares the things that people can do that are easy to implement. Because getting ready for a disaster is not that complicated. But sometimes people don't do it because they think it's like this huge deal and it's going to be so hard. And people are afraid. They don't even want to think about it. They think it's too much. But if you break it down into simple steps that you can do, one thing, a small thing, and then another thing, and then another thing, makes it more accessible, so that people don't feel overwhelmed and will actually create their plan and get ready. But if you don't actually do it, it's not going to help anyone. I know people who have said that I after the first fires, I decided to make a plan, and we've had all these shutoffs. We've had 2 fires, and they still haven't created their plan. So we need programs that are simple, that people can do with a minimal amount of time, money, and effort, which are accessible to everyone. And that's part of this program, Listo. We're going to provide a Zoom call with people. They can choose with Corazon Healdsburg. People can choose the time that's convenient for them. It'll be weekends, days, evenings. So this is one of the things that we need to do. We need to make it accessible and easy for people, so they can do it with things they already have in their house, so they don't have to invest a lot of money in preparedness. As Alma said, we're going to be offering these workshops with Listos, which is just an hour and a half of your time. And during this hour and a half, you're going to receive all the information that you need, so you can prepare yourself for the next disaster. If you need help, if you need support, with Zoom. If you don't know how to use Zoom, you can do it with your cell, you can do it with your laptop or with a iPad, and it's going to be free. We're going to have it in English, we're going to have it in Spanish during the day, during the evening. We want to offer it also for business people. If you're a business owner and you would like to have a specific class for your workers, we can also do a class that's specific with your workers, with listos, to offer that to your employees. So if you're from Healdsburg, Windsor, Geyserville, Cloverdale, from the north part of Sonoma, get in touch with us. We have a list, a waiting list, or a list of people who are interested in the classes. Our telephone number, as we said at the beginning, 707-395-0938, or you can send us a message on Facebook or Instagram. But it's very important. It's only an hour and a half of your time, but it could save your life, could save your family's life. So it's very important. Thank you so much for that collaboration that we're going to have with Listo. It's very important for our community and very needed. I would also like to speak a little bit about, I'd like to hear from James Gore. What plans are there currently for evacuation sites, taking COVID into account? Have some sites been designated in the area if we have another fire? We have the same system of shelters that we have used in the past. What we need to do is to make sure that they will function better. In 2017, the Red Cross, and as well in 2019, I'm just going to say it, there were problems between local control, of control of an outside agency. And I remember once we were in Healdsburg in the community center, and here's a person with Corazon and Healdsburg City, and here was another person in charge of the Red Cross, and they had their own plans, and they only wanted to communicate with certain people directly. And what we're pushing is that we have the capacity to manage our own shelters from now on. It's our responsibility to not be dependent on the Red Cross. They do good work, but we have the experience, we have the capacity to do it. So that's what we are doing. There are better ways of interpreting and translating. I'd like to say something if you could give me a moment. We're talking about different types of disasters, but we seem to be living in an era of destruction. In 2017, the damage was so bad that we couldn't see the economic impact on families that weren't in the houses that caught fire. In 2019, with Kincaid, because we did a better job with evacuations and systems to ensure that firefighters could do their job instead of evacuating people, we could see the impact on the community. More than 1,000 people evacuated to the community center and the fairgrounds. One thing that's really important to me is that everyone who is working with you with Corazon, that you You have to raise your voice and demand what is needed. I say this from a position of privilege. I understand that. I have access to the system that I manage. I have the buttons, the levers, I know where they are. I know what buttons to push. But there's a lot of lack of faith in the system. There's fear. There are reports about ICE presence. All these factors which affect people like an illness, and they don't want to raise their voice and be connected with their own community, with information, with preparation. What I would like to see is an organization like Corazon and like a DocuFund and others in our community, that we are creating the shields, I think is the right word, because we need to defend our communities. It's true. I don't trust how everyone to manage the situation. So as white people and who are privileged, we need to ensure that people have the capacity to demand, to raise their voice, and they need the protection to be able to do so and not to turn fear into bad actions. So for me, the most important thing is that everyone know there are ways to do this. We can do this. Corazon, which is the important organization to be in touch with the church, but in your homes and in your organizations like Corazon or the churches, you need to demand and start in the areas where you have confidence. Because between now and 2050, the Latinos are going to be the majority of our population. That is changing quickly. And we need to change from a reactive to a proactive response. And that's why I am trying to take the position of not only being a leader, but being an ally or an accomplice. We need support. We need to create safe places. And you are a large part of that effort. That's the way it is. Thank you. Thank you. I'd also like to make the point, many have heard about the census and are asking, why do I have to fill out the census? The importance is that you be counted during the 2020 census so that if we have another disaster, they will know how many people there are in a given city in an area so they can send the help and the resources that are needed. So when they say there weren't enough beds in a shelter, it's because maybe they didn't know how many people there were in that area. Or now, where we're at with coronavirus, we say there aren't enough beds in the hospitals, or there aren't enough help for the COVID tests. There aren't enough COVID tests. Partly it's because there is not the information in terms of knowing how many people live in the area. So if you haven't filled out the census, please get in touch with us. We can help you to fill it out. It only takes 10 minutes. There are 10 questions. You only fill it out once every 10 years, and they are not going to ask you what is your immigration status. They're not going to ask you if you are citizens or if you have papers or not. It's just basic information that you are already sharing when you fill out Medi-Cal applications, food stamp applications, if you're filling out forms for your kids at school. Please make yourself counted in the census. Prepare your backpacks. Alma, I'd like to ask you, what would be the 5 most important things that you think you should have in your backpack ready in case you need to bolt out the door? And I'd also like to recommend that you have a backpack in the car, another one in the home, in the work, a backpack for everywhere that you spend time. It's good to have a backpack for each person because the 5 things I recommend: water, food, medications, especially if you have prescription medications, it's critical, documents that you need, and a communication plan. If there's a communication plan with your family, that should be in your backpack. I have a backpack in my car that has the basic water, snacks, things that I can eat if something happens and I'm not home. I also, near my bed, I have a small backpack. And we also have a larger supplies, have a big plastic bucket full of stuff in case we have to stay here. But as we also heard with Neil's experience, if you have to evacuate and you have where to put it in your car, you can put those supplies in your car. So if you get to a shelter and there's no food, there's no water, there's still kind of getting it together, you can have what you need for you and your family. So in those bigger backpacks or kits, you'll have more water, more food, can opener, things like that. And that will be really useful for you, whether you have to stay at home or leave. I was in a meeting with the Red Cross, and one of the plans was this: if you had a fire and you had to go to a shelter, one of the measures they're going to take to be sure of social distancing is that people will stay in their car if it's not too hot, and they will bring resources out to the cars so that families won't be close together and be contagious. So if you go to a shelter, you won't necessarily have everything you need there. So when you pack your backpack or your kit or your bucket full of things, think, what would I need that perhaps no one will have for me, and pack them. I have a change of clothes in my backpack. I have another pair of shoes, a light blanket, things like that. So each one of your children, if you have children, let them pack their own bag with help, of course. This will teach them how to prepare. So it's creating a culture of preparedness, and it starts when children are small. So if they participate in the plans, they make their backpacks, when they're older, it'll be something normal that they do, the preparedness. So be sure to have at least a few days of medications, because I was helping in the Healdsburg Center. The Red Cross had a nurse and a medical center, but it would take 1 or 2 days in getting the medication that people needed. So if you get there and you need something critically, they might not be able to get it for a day or two. So make sure you have at least 3 days supplies of the medications that you need. I also comes to mind other things you can do. When I had to evacuate in 2017, I was the kind of person who never had gas in my car. So if you had to leave at dawn for emergency, I said, oh no, I don't have gas in my car. And the lines at the gas stations were so long. So be prepared in that way. Have your car gassed up or have a can of extra gasoline. I also had 2 small dogs, so I also had to have go bags for my pets, their food, their leash. And I've also been thinking and I don't know if you recommend this, in case of having to evacuate again, and have several people have said you might have to stay in your car, maybe it's time to buy a tent in case I have to leave and camp somewhere. I've been thinking maybe I should consider to have a tent in case I have to camp somewhere. Would you recommend that? I tell people every day, imagine that you're going to go camping and that you won't have anything and that you'll have to cook and you need everything. When I packed our larger kit, everything that we have in there are all the things we use for camping. A small stove, something to purify water, all the things that we would take camping. So if you think in those terms, that it's everything you would need to go on a camping trip, you can put that in your larger kit. You're going to have everything that you need in case there's no one who can help you. Because if things aren't going well and the refuges and the refuge centers are full, you might have to go somewhere else. If you remember in 2017, many people didn't go to the shelter, they went to the beach, but they didn't have any resources. They got there, they didn't have blankets, they didn't have food, they didn't have clothes, it was cold, they weren't ready. So if you think in those terms, having everything that you might need, you can compare it to preparing for a camping trip. And if you think about the blackouts, the gasoline stations weren't working. So one of the things I tell people when I do trainings is don't let your tank get below half. Because if there's a shut off, the gas stations won't be working. They could turn the pumps on so people could pump gas. So it's something to consider, keeping your gas tank at least half full. So as Alma and Ruben said, we learned from that experience after 2 fires that sometimes it's good to have things ready, because as Ruben said, if you should be prepared, if you have to stay or if you have to go, because you might not know if you're staying or if you're leaving, or your power might be shut off. So many things in our fridge were ruined when the power went out. We didn't have a generator for the water pump, so we had very little water that we had access to. So now we have tried to be more prepared with a generator, a large tank for water in case we have to shelter in place. Now, one of my sons has allergies sometimes. When there's dust a few times a year, he gets it really bad. I have medicine in each one of our cars because we might not know which one we need to use. And since they play soccer, the one who needs it carries one in his backpack. He brings the most necessary things with him for his personal care, medicines. Because when we're at their games, we always try to have a backpack with what we might need because we never know where we might need to stay or go. So this has helped us because we have things that can be helpful in case we do need to evacuate again. At least the minimum that we need to survive. And like people said about the gasoline, trying to have a jug or a gallon at the house with extra gasoline in case you have to leave to get to a gasoline station or to get somewhere. Thank you so much. Before we finish this conversation, if you're watching us on Facebook, I invite you to send us a comment or a question. I'd also like to provide this opportunity if there's something else that our guests this afternoon would like to share or add before we end our meeting. I would like to add in terms of preparation. Every family should get prepared. My recommendation is this. We know where to get information. If someone doesn't have information, you can call us. You can call the fire station. We can provide you with all the information you need. Personal recommendation of mine, which I recommend to all families, that one member of the family at least should be trained in first aid and CPR. Really important, because many times people get desperate in an emergency, but if there is someone who's trained on how to help a family member and give first aid and give CPR, that makes a huge difference. There's more tranquility in that family because they feel safer, because they know there's someone in the family who is trained in case of an emergency. So if people are listening to me, want to learn CPR or first aid, go to any agency that offers that service, because it makes a huge difference in an emergency. Alma was speaking about tents. This is something that I recommend. In case of an earthquake, if your house collapses, you're going to be outside, and we're not going to have help for days, possibly, because there will be other resources like schools that will need help, hospitals. So as individual families, there might not be anyone who can help us. So I recommend getting your own resources together so that you're ready. Like Alma said, some tanks of gas so that you can cook outside, because you might not have electricity and there might not be resources. So preparation, and a culture change, like Alma said. We need that change. If we don't make that change, we're going to repeat the same errors of the past, and we need that change. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to add something? Once more, I'd like to say to everyone, this is our community, not just mine, not just yours. We don't have to keep living in bubbles that separate the white community from the Latina community. We need to break those barriers, those bubbles, and we have to raise our voices, and there are ways to do this. The first time that I did a campaign to be elected supervisor, I stood in front of supermarkets, and many people who spoke Spanish as their first language didn't want to talk with me. Who's this guy who's asking for my signature? Who is this politician, this blonde guy? What does he want from me? And they always turned their eyes away from me or looked down. We have to be the owners of change in our community, and all the changes, all the systems that we need to improve, all the resources that we are getting are so important. But we are only going to achieve progress and be owners of change if people from the community can raise their voices and take charge of their future. And I want to be a part of that. I don't need to be the leader. I want to be an accomplice and an ally to help each other. Thank you. Those of you who are watching us and listening, I invite you to be part of this cultural change. I invite you to be prepared for the next disaster. I invite you to be counted in the census. If you would like more help or if you need support, please get in touch with us. Once more, our telephone is 707-395-0938. You can also send us messages on Facebook or Instagram. we are going to start the Listos program. We're going to have a lot of classes in both English and Spanish. They're free. They're only an hour and a half. This will all be on internet. Alma will be giving the class. She's a face that we already know and recognize. Corazon invites you to participate in this class. Once more, make yourself counted so we can have the resources that we need. Otherwise, we will lose $1,800 per person per year if we are not counted. In 2010, 100,000 Latino children were not counted. Imagine all the resources we lost. Thank you for being with us this evening. This is the first step to be prepared for the next natural disaster. I'm Angie with Corazon Healdsburg. Thank you to our guests who are with us this afternoon. And thank you to everyone who is watching us on Facebook Live and on the Zoom webinar. Good evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.